Whoever is listening, guys, welcome back. My name is Grayson Mann. This is the MWP Podcast. Thank you for joining us once again. We just dropped our interview with Clemson wide receiver Travion Thompson, and today we welcome on a Sun Belt and ACC broadcaster, Noah Frary. Noah, thank you for joining us. We're going to get some insight on the broadcasting world, your journey, and just have a great conversation today. So thank you again for taking the time. Welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, Grayson, really excited to be here and chop it up a little bit today.
Yeah, and actually, just for the viewers' context, my brother walked in here right before we started. So, if you're watching this, sorry for scaring you, I guess. But he walks in and he goes, just so you guys know of Noah's street cred around South Carolina at the very least. My brother hears him speak for a second and goes, "Oh, I know who that is." So this guy is very well known, and we're going to talk about your journey. So just talk about what you've been up to, your duties as broadcaster and play-by-play.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of start from the beginning a little bit. I got into this industry in a little bit of a weird path. I actually went to school as a business major, always wanted to work in sports, but thought I would be on more of the business side of sports. And then through just a happen chance opportunity, ended up getting into broadcasting. And really the rest after that is history. I moved up to the South Carolina area about 2 years ago now. It'll be 2 years in July to kind of start pursuing this dream of making broadcasting my full-time career. And now 2 years into it, I've done hundreds of events over the last couple of years across, I believe it's 13 or 14 different sports now. As I kind of just try to work my way up through the industry, no one has the same path in this industry in sports broadcasting. I decided to go all in on the college sports route, and it's slowly but steadily paying off for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially being in an area like South Carolina where you got schools like Clemson who continue to be in that national discussion. There's a lot of stuff going around here, especially in the upstate. So for you, where do you think you found that calling? You mentioned that you started out as a business student, but was there maybe a clip online maybe you saw, or was it like a dream you had the entire time, like you mentioned? For me, it was listening to guys like Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit on College Football Saturdays going, man, I want to be a part of this. Was that the same for you, or did you maybe find a clip online and thought, I need to get on this ASAP?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was interesting. I before living in Florida, before moving up here, I had grown up in upstate New York. And so the track of my childhood was Michael Kay calling Yankees games on Yes Network. And I always thought that was, the coolest job in the world. And then, thinking back as I've done over the last couple of years, I had several people in my life that always said, hey, you've got a great voice. You should get into television or radio. And I kind of always just, threw that to the side. It was never something that was really an interest for me. Funny story, how I actually really got into broadcasting is I had gotten into some sports information work at the school that I had graduated from down in Florida. And the guy who did our live stream broadcasts at the time, they were put on YouTube. He got sick, and being the young and maybe dumb 23-year-old, I said, well, I can add something else to my plate. And so that was 5 years ago now that I put on a headset for the first time and called a soccer game. And really after that, just started to fall in love with that aspect of things. Started calling a bunch of games there. Really had only gotten experience in basketball, volleyball, and soccer at the time. And then started to just get some freelance opportunities from knocking on doors and seeing them open. And then eventually it led to me saying, hey, this is something I really enjoy. This is something I want to pursue. And that's when I really started to implement a plan to turn this into something full-time. And that is even what led to me moving to this area, because as you mentioned, you have all the schools in South Carolina, but within about 3.5, 4 hours of Greenville, South Carolina, there's, if my numbers are right, if my memory is right, there's 35 Division I colleges. And so it just presents a lot of opportunity in this area to try to get into the broadcasting industry.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there's so many opportunities up here, but I think also something I wanted to touch on is you knocking on doors. Can you walk through that process of just when you were initially starting out and going, because for me, it was getting the itch, and then you start to ask and try to talk to so many different people. So for you, what was that process like of knocking? The thing I use with my friends and family is I'm just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. What is that process like to really just embrace that process? What is the process like to embrace that process? I'm starting to repeat myself here, but you get what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, and harkening back to, my business background, One of the things that, you learn in business school is how to network and the benefits of networking. And so again, when I announced that I was leaving my current job, it was a little bit interesting. I had signed a contract with that current job, so I knew I had it was about 6 to 8 months before I would be stepping into this new role. And so I just started utilizing LinkedIn. I started utilizing staff directories on college websites. You can generally find who's in charge of video and just start reaching out to those people. At that time, I didn't have a lot of great film to be showing them, so it was more selling them on who I was, whether that be through a phone call or a Zoom call. We were just getting out of COVID, so Zoom was very popular at the time. I remember one story in particular, and this is really what kicked off, really that networking thing for me. And it actually ties into Clemson University and South Carolina in general. I had reached out to a man whose name is Anish Shroff. You might know that name. He calls football for ESPN. He also does, he's also the voice of the Carolina Panthers on radio now. And I reached out to him, as I did to a lot of people, and just said, hey, I'm a young broadcaster. I'm looking to get into the industry. I would just love some advice. And if you've ever done any of that on LinkedIn or even through email, it's kind of hit and miss who you hear back from. And he happened to reach back out to me. He had no reason to do that. I was not giving him any benefit, but he took some time to send me a nice message and then let me know that the week later he would be calling. I believe it was Clemson versus, I can't remember the school that they were playing. It ended up being a massive blowout, but he said, hey, I'm calling this game. I've got to drive home from Clemson to Charlotte afterwards. If you'd like to give me a phone call, here's my cell number. We can talk for 30 minutes. And that turned into just a really good conversation and starting to learn about the industry. And then fast forward about a year after that, I then made the move up here to South Carolina, and our relationship had been sporadic at that point, as most are early on, just because, again, I'm not bringing a lot of value to that relationship at that point. Moved up here to South Carolina, shot him an email and said, hey, I'm about an hour and a half away down in Greenville. Can I come up and maybe grab coffee with you in Charlotte? We ended up having coffee that day, and that has turned into just a fantastic relationship, someone that I can go to ask questions in the industry. And so part of it was obviously people being willing to reach back out, but then also being a go-getter and attacking those types of relationships, being intentional. And, for me, that relationship has spanned almost 2.5 years. And it has been neat. It actually has led to what has become my love of the sport of lacrosse. He's the voice of lacrosse for ESPN, and I've really started to enjoy that sport, and a lot of that is from him. So just a neat story there, but there's, a lot of cold calling, a lot of emailing, a lot of networking on LinkedIn, and, it's hit and miss, but you build those relationships, you get an opportunity, you do a good job, and you hope that you get asked back.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, it's really like that, like you said, is that the things you don't expect to really blossom eventually turn into something really, I would say, really beautiful, because those guys don't necessarily have to give back, but to see them do that is it's a great thing. And so for you, besides that networking aspect, what also have you learned working in this business? Because you can have somebody who's waiting in the aisles. Take me, for example, who's ready to jump on the next opportunity that's thrown at them. I'm not the only one, and it's a very competitive industry. What have you learned besides that networking aspect? Maybe it's in a call, maybe it's the prep beforehand, because there's so much, I think, that people don't necessarily don't know about, but there's a lot that goes into just speaking into a microphone for 3 hours.
Yeah, no, and I think you touched on it a little bit right there, and that's the prep aspect of things. My goal, and again, I parachute into a lot of different schools. I'm all over the place, and I'm not necessarily getting the luxury of seeing a team play every game that they play. And so for me, that process has looked like building a standard procedure of how to prep so that when I step into a broadcast, I feel like at that point in time, I'm the most knowledgeable person outside of the people on that team to what has happened in their season, the different injuries that have taken place, different stat nuggets about people that are playing on those teams. Generally, an average rule of thumb in this industry is for every hour that you're on TV, it's about 2 hours worth of prep that's taking place. So the average college basketball game is going to be somewhere around 2 hours. So if you extrapolate that out, I'm doing an average of 4 to 4.5 hours worth of prep for each broadcast. And that looks like building a set of charts that has information that's easily accessible for me, so that when we're in the moment, I can find something quickly through a color code or things. And that could be something as small as, hey, this person has just scored their season high, those types of things. And then that process also looks like we generally will sit down, me and my analysts will sit down for a Zoom call with those coaches, the head coach of each team, just to get some of those stories, that background about the season. So the prep, I think, is a massive part. And it's one area that maybe I over prep, but, early on in this, in this career, I think what I learned is that, if you look at all the prep you put together for a broadcast, a good broadcast, you've only used 10% of it. And so you want to be able to have those nuggets, those stories, so that if a broadcast goes a certain way, you are prepared for that. And then even more so, as I mentioned earlier, with that story about the blowout football game, there are times where your team is losing by 20, 25 points, and you don't have to be as on top of the action as you do in a 7-point game in the fourth quarter. So it's being prepared for those moments. And I would further just echo that too. It's a great perspective for life in terms of how being able to have conversations with people. And I pride myself on, not only can I have conversations about your favorite sports team, but I'm knowledgeable in a lot of things. I'm so much more than just a broadcaster. And maybe what that looks like is waking up in the morning and reading, through Fox News, through CNN, just being aware of what's going on in your world, scrolling through a Twitter feed, just being knowledgeable so that you can have conversations with anyone that you run across.
Yeah, and I think that's a valuable insight, just because I think when you mention conversation, the person that you're going to be in with the booth, it needs to feel natural. It needs to feel like you guys didn't just meet 5 minutes prior to the game starting. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I think for me, what I've learned about the most, and some guys that I talk to, that if Luke Winstall's watching, he does some broadcasts in Georgia, told me that the biggest thing for him is prep and being able to say, hey, like you said, I'm going to be the most knowledgeable person in this arena. And that becomes so important, because when you find someone, I did a basketball game back in February, and this guy had been, I think it was either steals and I was able to pull it up, and I was like, oh, that's so cool to be able to go, oh, here's this piece of paper. This is the stat. And I can convey that to the audience that's watching. So it's really an interesting process for you. You mentioned all the colleges that you're tied to. Do you have a specific game or a call where that's very memorable in your eyes, that maybe it was early on, maybe it's something you did recently that really sticks to memory?
Yeah, there's two that just come to memory, two things that I've been a part of in the last year. One was more controversial, and the other one was more memorable. I'll go with the memorable one first. And for me, that was an opportunity, to call Clemson's first ACC women's lacrosse home game against Duke, and it ended up being an upset. It was the first ranked win for Allison Kolick's side at Clemson. And what was so neat and so memorable for me about that call was, speaking back to those coaches calls that we have, that Friday we had sat down with the coaching staff at Clemson, and a question had been asked and answered. And basically the answer had been, hey, we had just sat down with our, graduate transfers and just thank them for, how good of a job that they have done. And, sometimes I find that the follow-up questions to answers are some of the most valuable. And I simply said, why now? Why did you have that conversation now? And, give credit to Allison Kolick. She was very honest with me at that point. She said, hey, the reason we sat down and talked to those kids is I just found out that I have breast cancer. And we wanted to let our girls know about that. But then it quickly came with, hey, we're announcing this next week. And so we don't want that talked about on the broadcast. So you're going through this moment, probably the biggest win to that point in Clemson women's lacrosse history, knowing that there is this story in the background that we're not able to get into, but knowing the bigger meaning to this game for this program. And then they go on to come from behind in the fourth quarter against a ranked opponent and win. So for me, that was super neat, just to be a part of a new program getting their first ever ranked win. And for me as a broadcaster, those are the moments you live for, those close games in the fourth quarter, the back and forth. And that was great. Speaking of the, the other moment, the controversial moment this year, and again, in this industry, you just never know what is going to blow up. And we were in a moment during the Sun Belt women's basketball tournament earlier this year. We were, I believe, in the semifinal round at that point, or maybe it was actually the quarterfinals. But it was a matchup between Old Dominion and Troy. We get to the fourth quarter. Old Dominion had led the entire game, and I think with seconds left in the fourth quarter, they're leading by 3 or 4 points at this time. And they have a sidelines out of bounds play that they're going to throw it in, and the goal is to get it in bounds, get fouled, shoot some free throws, hopefully ice the game. And when we call the Sun Belt games, particularly this year, we've actually been doing them out of a studio in New Orleans that's in the Superdome. And so we weren't on site for this, but we have some great video monitors. We're able to get a great picture. And all of a sudden, I start counting the number of players on the court, and there's 5 players on the court, and there's 1 throwing it inbounds. So you do some quick math. There's 6 players on the court for Old Dominion, and you know the game of basketball. You're only allowed to have 5. And so I noticed that very quickly. Actually, the officials never noticed it, and
Wow.
the game ended up going final without them noticing it. There should have been a technical foul. Troy should have had the basketball, a chance to take the lead, so on and so forth. But we were the only ones that noticed it, and we're calling it out on the broadcast, but the officials never did. So Old Dominion ends up getting the win. And I think what was neat for me is just everything that came out of that afterwards, the different Twitter posts and different things. I think at one point there was a Sports Illustrated article that was written on it. It had over 6 million views on Twitter. And so
Wow.
just early on in your career, those are just fun moments. It hasn't led to any work. But again, those are just the moments that you live for, and to be able to nail that call and realize that situation in the moment is just a lot of fun. And those are the type of mountaintop experiences kind of early on in your career.
I can't believe that, especially in the championship tournament. Got to be able to. All right, that actually really shocks me, especially if you're on the TV and you start hearing the announcer call that. I can't imagine being a Troy fan and being like, "Hey," like you're snapping your finger at the TV, like
Yeah.
they'll
It
figure it
was
out,
funny
right?
because honestly, no one in the venue realized it. We said it first, and then finally, there must have been like 4 or 5 seconds left in the game because the game clock ran out and the officials left the court. So once they had done that, it wasn't something that was able to be reviewed. But you start to see fans walking down the stands, yelling to the bench, like, and showing like the video of what's going on, and realizing that they were watching our broadcast in venue. So it was just a
Oh
crazy moment. It was something fun to be a part of. It's still something that I look back on fondly of this past year. So.
man, I can't believe that. I would be that's crazy. I wonder if I saw that. I feel like if I like scroll down through the Twitter rabbit hole, I'd be able to find it somewhere. But yeah,
Oh, you
guys,
would
Old
easily.
Dominion Troy, look that up on the Sun Belt tournament. You'll be able to find Noah's call. But Noah, for you, you've been doing this for a while now. Have you seen the field change at all in terms of who they're letting broadcast, what they're going to broadcast, the way, like you said, doing calls offsite, like in the Superdome, for example? Where has this field changed, in your opinion, while you've been a part of it?
Yeah, I think it's continuing to shift as we speak. I mean, I think what we talked about with the studio is a big part of that. I've called 4 or 5 women's sports championships this year out of a studio in New Orleans instead of being on site. Credit to the Sun Belt. We have a great setup there. It's still not the same as being on site and the emotions you get from that. But we have everything that we need in order to be successful. And what you're seeing just across the board is people being more cost conscious and maybe smarter and realizing, hey, we can provide a better experience by being off site than we can being on site. You see, but you also do see sometimes where that experience isn't great, where you lose a broadcaster in the middle. So technology is a great thing. I think our hope in this industry is that what we started to see happen during COVID does not continue for forever. But I think we would be naive to see that because people who are in charge, they are always looking for ways to save money. And if that means having Noah call a game out of his basement in South Carolina and not having to pay for him to fly and get a rental car and pick up a hotel, that's a big aspect of things too. I think the other challenging thing in this industry is breaking through. It's not easy, and at the end of the day, there's not really a rhyme or reason for how people break through. Everyone takes a very unique path. And I think one of the neat things that you've seen a lot happen in this industry lately is you're starting to see a lot more female play-by-plays take over, and even some of companies are looking to hire female play-by-plays. I think it's neat for people to be getting opportunities. I think the only thing that I would say just in this industry, the one thing that I have seen early on is that we want to be putting the most talented people behind the mic. And I think that's important, whether that be female, male, any color. I think we want the best storytellers behind the mic, and that will be kind of interesting to watch and monitor over the coming years.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much. I had this conversation with Travion Thompson yesterday about how college football continues to change, and it's naive to think that the product that we're seeing right now isn't going to change, even if those changes are slight or maybe it's a tweak here or there. They're always, like you said, figuring out ways to save money, make money. How can we make this business better? So yeah, even behind the scenes, if you want to consider broadcasting that, where you can't necessarily see it, like you see Trevor Lawrence throwing a pass every down. You don't see the broadcaster with a microphone or Tony Romo talking about, oh, I don't know, Jim. You don't see that every single time. So this industry is going to completely change for you and for guys like me. I guess this is more my question to you. What is your advice to younger broadcasters who are in college or maybe in high school trying to say, hey, I want to be able to do this? Where do they start? Where do they go? And if they've had a couple of games under their belt, what do you suggest that they do moving forward? And I guess this is more my question to you in that case.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, first and foremost, one of the things I learned early on in this industry, and it was actually a play-by-play broadcaster out west that I had a conversation with. And, his biggest piece of advice to me was just don't be an asshole. And it was a good piece of advice. What it meant was just be a good person, treat people well, work hard in this industry. And what you find is that people, who you treat well, they tend to like to work with you again. They tend to, be willing to promote, you to maybe friends of theirs. I think the networking component, is a massive piece of all of this as well. Just building those relationships, in this industry are huge. And then, really for me, again, it's just reaching out to people, getting opportunities, and doing a good job. One of the things I learned early on too is, when I'm out calling a game at a small major school, maybe a women's soccer game, there are people that are watching that broadcast that really care about that sport and that opportunity. I might look at it as a stepping stone, but for them, it could be a family member that's playing, or maybe they're just a diehard sports fan of that program. And so being able to show up every time you get behind a mic is so important, and putting in the time so that when you get on that broadcast, when you are given that opportunity, that you're ready to go. And then I think to your point, which you said as well about getting those opportunities, again, no opportunity is too small. It's an opportunity to put on a headset and get better each day. It's continually learning from people and learning more about the craft, and then continuing to use those opportunities to grow in the industry. My first year in this industry, I was doing a lot of women's soccer. I was doing, some volleyball. I was doing some low-level women's lacrosse, and now that has led to me calling 5, Division I championships this past year. I've sent 5 teams to the NCAA tournament, and numerous other neat opportunities. I mean, I think back to even we were talking about Clemson's women's lacrosse season of getting to call a game against Boston College, who ended up playing in the national championship game. So, never taking an opportunity for granted, working hard, and then waiting to see how it all unfolds in the future.
An appreciation of the moment is certainly something that I think I don't especially like doing something like this where it's not like something I can make the own podcast set up. I can do that. But every time I get to put this on, there's always somebody out there who's like, I really appreciate what you're doing. It's a good escape. And so it's really valuable to be able to just put my best foot forward in anything you do, really. So
yeah, and and further to that point, the one thing that I think about is, 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, what I'm doing now was one of my dreams. I just finished a year where I called close to 200 sporting events at the Division I level. About 2.5 years ago, I had not called a single one. And so that was my dream at the time. Now, don't get me wrong. I have much bigger dreams. If you go to my Twitter bio right now, one of the post that's pinned is I want to call a football game at Death Valley someday for ESPN. So I have much bigger dreams and things that I'm attaining to. But being able to enjoy where you're planted is so important, because if you're constantly looking for what's next, that's a joy stealer. And being able to enjoy the moments and where you're planted currently and realize that you are living out your dream already is really neat. And that really helps you kind of get through some of the grind early on in this industry.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, that's at Calls by Noah for the Twitter handle. I'll have that link down in the bio just so I can get you, especially some more people to support you, because what you're doing is awesome and what you're able to do for our time. But we're going to do a couple rapid fire questions before we wrap up today, and you're feel free to answer it as in depth as possible. So Noah, for you, is there a dream person, play-by-play, color? And it can be someone who used to broadcast when you were growing up. Maybe it was someone that's doing it now. Who's your dream person to do a broadcast with? And maybe it's a sport, maybe it's a person.
Yeah, man, to do a broadcast with, I think, and this would never happen simply because he's a play-by-play person, but to sit in a booth for a Yankees game and watch Michael Kay do his thing would be one of the coolest things for me. I think, anyone who gets into college sports too, a dream would always be to work a game with Jay Billis, a Kirk Herbstreit.
Mm-hmm.
Those opportunities might not be realistic, but those are just some names that when you first think about it, it is cool to think about.
Hey, maybe someone one day is going, man, I want to be able to do a call with Noah Frary. You never know.
Hey, maybe.
For you, and this is going to be our last question. So this is going to be dropping, I believe, either tomorrow or on Monday. Haven't necessarily decided. It depends on how today's trip to Clemson goes. But Noah, for you, do you have an NBA Finals prediction that starts tonight between the Denver Nuggets and the Miami Heat?
Yeah, I am not the biggest NBA fan. I have been following it. I've grown up in the era of watching LeBron James, so I've kind of just followed him for years. So obviously he's out of the playoffs right now. What a series for the Heat to get past the Celtics the other day. But I think Denver's looked really strong throughout. I could see, Jimmy Buckets and Miami stealing a couple games. So give me Denver winning in 6. But I think the Denver Nuggets are going to be the NBA champions this year.
Bookmark it here. We got Noah's call for the Denver Nuggets in 6. I said Denver in 5 on our NBA Finals preview that posted on Wednesday. So you can find that there. So guys, this is Noah Frary, ACC play-by-play, Sun Belt play-by-play. You can find him. Like my brother said before this thing started, he's got a voice that's instantly recognizable. I'm sure you've heard his voice in the call, so if you recognize it, tell him what your favorite game was that he's called. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 125 of the Man with a Plan podcast. Help us get to 20,000 listeners across all platforms. Subscribe. You guys know the drill by now. Click all the buttons. Thank you as always for the support. Take care and have a great day.